Okay, in no way does Bondo sponsor me. However, I do use their products. A lot of photos on the forum of finished droid builds. Some photos of printed, fresh off the printer, or printing droids, but I don't see a ton of photos of in the process of going through finishing. That's in between coming off the printer and before the final coat of paint. Everybody knows you need filler and you need to do a lot of sanding, back and forth, but I don't see all that many progress photos, so I thought I'd make this video of what I'm doing so far. Now, one thing I noticed, I'm getting low on this container. I've had it for several years, and it's got a stage 3 number on it there. Different Bondo products are for different stages, from having, a smashed fender that you get the metal as straight as possible, and then you put different grades of filler material until you have a really fine coat, is the theory of operation here. I went to get a new one and I noticed it was stage 2, and I'm like, okay. I went to the first hardware store. I had a coupon for $5 off anything in the store, and they had number 2 but not number 3. So I thought, oh, okay, well, it's got a different graphic, and now it's number 2. Well, let me go to another hardware store. So I went to Home Depot. They only had number 2 also. So I think what's happened here, on the side of this can, you can kind of see up there, it's got stages 1, 2, 3, and 4. And it talks a little bit about them. I think what's happened is they might have come up with some new product lines, and they've just renumbered this to stage 2 instead of stage 3. The glazing putty I use is also 2. This is not glazing putty, so I think they've just changed their numbers. So be wary of that until I crack this open and smell it, which is a funny thing to say, but if I crack that open and smell it, I'll be able to tell you if it's the same, pretty much the same formula as this. I've used so much of this stuff that I can recognize the smell of 2-part Bondo body filler from a mile away. And it's nasty, so you do not use this inside. Use it outside. Now, that being said, Pacific Northwest winter, it's been terrible. It's been 40s, in the 40s for the temperature, 40 Fahrenheit, 45, whatever. Humidity, 70s, 80s, 90s. Raining almost every day. There's a short break today that wasn't raining, so I got some sanding in. What I did was I took this, I had this in the house, I had the Bondo container in the house. I then, when I was ready, I got all my tools out into the garage, and I got a small electric plug-in heater, and I ran out into the garage, and I mixed up the Bondo, and I put the Bondo on, and I put the leg up like this on the floor, and I had a electric heater pointing at the middle of it on low, and I could tell, I sat there for quite a while making sure it wasn't getting too hot, so it wasn't going to melt it, bend it, or anything. It was just a warm enough temperature that this thing wasn't like in the 40s, because my garage is not even insulated. It's attached to the house, insulated walls going into the house, but the other walls and the roof, the ceiling, are not insulated in my garage, unfinished garage that we actually park cars in. So I decided to go ahead and do that, and it worked fine. But yeah, you don't want to use it anywhere that you can get that smell really sticking around in your house. So word of warning there, the stuff does smell. Now, I came up with the methods that I use by my other hobby, restoring and working on arcade machines from the 80s and 90s and up. Shout out to Atari Tempest, my favorite video game of all time, from the 80s. Vector graphics, wonderful. Restoring those cabinets, they are made of particle board. This is MDF, which is kind of like super cardboard, right? It's like almost like sawdust that's just compressed with glue into a final wood product. Particle board's pretty much the same, but it's not as tight as this. It's a lighter color. It's like they use larger pieces of wood material when they make it, but it's the same thing. It's a wood product that I believe is just made out of waste wood and glue. And one thing about this MDF or particle board, they're both the same. If they get wet, the water sinks into it like a towel, just kind of expands. The water damage makes it fluff up. It gets thicker as it's absorbing the moisture. And then once that dries, it's flaky where it took up the moisture, and you can just like crumble it apart. So it's not made for anything outdoors. It's going to see water. So when you're restoring an arcade cabinet, one of the things you want to do is get the edges nice and smooth, because they have this stuff on the edges called T-molding, which is plastic molding that goes into a slot that's cut down the center of the edge to protect the sides of the cabinet. A lot of times that's gone, or it's just been smacked around, so those edges have a lot of nicks and dents in them. So if you're going to put brand new vinyl side art all over the side of your cabinet, you want those nice and straight lines. So I just came up with a way to do that, as well as if you've got a corner and the corner's been chunked apart, sometimes depending on how much is gone, I might put screws or nails in as anchors, and then I'll use the Bondo to rebuild the corner. Extreme situations, I haven't done it, but you can actually cut part of the cabinet off and then cut the same size, same width wood and replace the whole piece. But I haven't gone that far in a restoration. I normally just use Bondo to get things, both edges and being smashed, to get it as smooth as possible before I put new side art on. So before I get to the finished piece, this is the method I use. So right here you can probably see that this side piece here that's glued in isn't as tall as the leg piece here. So refresher, this leg piece, 1, 2, 3 large pieces, and then 2, 4 side pieces that help hold everything together. So putting these side pieces on, they don't fit flush, whether my printer printed them a bit small, or whether when I was gluing it they didn't line up well, or whatever the reason, that's what I ended up with. These are lower than this. So how do you get rid of that when you get it ready for paint, both on the back side and the front side? Because you want everything as smooth as possible before you print. So here's what I came up with working on arcade cabinets that works really good for me. So I put a piece of blue painter's tape all along the edge. Okay. Then I mix up my Bondo, which Bondo dries really fast. If it's above 70, mid-70 temperatures, the stuff just takes a few minutes and it's solid. And so the problem I have trying to put it on in a controlled manner, not too thick, I was wasting a lot of Bondo doing what the instructions say, where they tell you, which I'm not going to try and read this here, but it tells you how much of the hardener and the resin to use to mix together, right? And then you mix it together in the lid or whatever you mix it together on. So at first I was using what it recommended, because I just like to make sure I am getting as close to the correct ratio as possible. And it would dry before I use even half of it. So what I ended up doing is getting a cheap measuring spoon, a couple cheap measuring spoons. And again, this is so worn out, I can't even read what the I can't even read what size it is. anymore. But basically, open the can, I mix it up with this really large screwdriver, and it's so thick it comes out on the screwdriver. I fill this measuring spoon up, put it in here, fill it a second time, put it in there, wipe off my screwdriver, and then the cream hardener, I fill this halfway. And then I use the big screwdriver again to put it in there. Then I mix it up, and then I start applying it. So basically I'm using half portions of what the instructions say on how to mix it. So I'm still wasting, but I'm not wasting nearly as much as I was before. So that's something you can do to try and keep your ratios close to correct. And yeah, if I actually look for a measuring cup or spoon or whatever that I didn't have to fill something twice and fill this one halfway, it would probably be even easier for me. But this is what I ended up with, and it's working fine. So that's what I've stayed with. Obviously broken the handle off that one. I've used it so much. Plastic spreader that you can get at hardware stores. I use that a lot also in the application. So once I've mixed up the two parts into this, what I do, because I've already got my tape, put the screwdriver in it, and it's got a good consistency to it. It's fairly thick, so it's not like water. So you can scoop it up, and then maybe twirl it around so the little bit that's trying to drip back off, doesn't drip on your part. Then I just kind of put it along the edge, so I've got it along the edge. That's the first step. Then I come back with this screwdriver, or you could use the scraper too. But I've been using a screwdriver for so long that I'm fairly good at controlling it. And what I do is hold it so you're just pressing the blue tape, pushing down, and spreading that material, that Bondo, across the edge. And what that does is it gets it down into that edge, because you want a nice sharp edge. You don't want it to be too rounded. So pushing it into the edge, and then you can kind of, as you're going, you can kind of see in something like this where it goes down on this brace that's attached, that's glued in. You can kind of just get it to where when you wipe over it, it's nice, it's level, and it's a little bit higher than this. The higher you get it, the more sanding you're going to have to do to take it back down to match this. But if you don't put enough on there, you'll end up having to do a second coat. So it's just kind of a trial and error until you get the hang of it about how much you put on. I end up usually rather use more than less. I'd rather spend a little bit more time sanding than mixing up more of this smelly Bondo stuff. So you can if you're interested in trying this method, always I suggest try something on a scrap piece, see how it works, see if you like it, see if maybe you'd rather use the spot putty or more primer spray. Again, part of the reason I'm doing this is because it's just not spray paint weather, and without backing a car or two out of our garage and making a plastic paint booth and putting some kind of heater inside, there's no way I can really do much painting, if any painting at all, until the temperatures warm up. So that's the method I used, and this was the result after being sanded. So before being sanded, you can see I had Bondo this far out. All the areas that are really dark are thicker with Bondo. Light is thinner with Bondo. And white is where the plastic is higher than the Bondo. So if you look, you can kind of see where it's white, tends to be white around some of the walls, right? Remember, this is one piece and this side panel is another piece. You can see right here it's white because that just happens to be a little bit higher when it printed on the glass bed as opposed to the rest of the print, whether it's due to the fact that it does outer, the way it prints, I don't know, but you can kind of see the bright white are areas that are higher because I've sanded down into the plastic. And this is kind of a mixture of sanding a bit of the plastic, but mostly Bondo, and this is just sanding Bondo. So I can feel like in this corner, I didn't get quite enough Bondo. The ankle goes up over this piece, so that's probably not something I'm going to worry about. But I was nervous about getting this slot filled with Bondo, so I was careful around that edge. So it's a little bit low here. And for something that small, I'll probably not go back over that with Bondo. Maybe I will, maybe I won't. But I'm betting if I just prime and then use a bit of this, I can get that corner to the right height without having to put more Bondo on it. It all depends. Since I still have that leg to do and I still have most of the front of this leg to do, I'll probably have enough Bondo that I can just put a blob there. So we'll see. But the main thing is, like I was saying, try to get, it's a balancing act of getting enough on there so that you don't have to do multiple coats, but so you don't have to spend hours and hours sanding the stuff back down to get it back level. I didn't bring what I sand with out, but it's just one of those hard rubber sanding tools that you cut a piece of sandpaper to the right width and you basically wrap it around. So try to keep it as flat as possible. I kind of start going in this direction, up and down on things like this because the Bondo's in a stripe like that. So I kind of start like that, and then once I can tell that I'm starting to get close, I start to see some of the white come through like this. Then I'll be a little bit more careful, maybe go side to side instead of up to down, because if you do up and down, there's a risk that you might put too much weight this way and round the corner. So maybe I'll go diagonal or like this, just trying to get it to the point where I can see plastic, so I know that I'm down to plastic, and I see Bondo, because that's the whole goal, is for the Bondo to fill that low spot. And that's where I stopped. I did this with 100 grit sandpaper, all by hand, because I just prefer hand sanding to machine most of the time. So 100 grit is what I did. And then obviously before I paint this with anything, I'll go back over this with 220 grit to get it a bit more smooth. And then I go over that with primer. So this is the main coat to get areas that are definitely too low, that I know need to be filled, to get them up higher. So once I spray the thing with primer, there'll be a lot less work than if I just held off, sprayed it with primer, and then went after all these low areas after the primer. And like I said, if you keep your part and the Bondo at room temperature, even if it's a bit colder out, you can then like run out and mix the stuff up and just try to have some kind of a heater that's not hot enough to melt your parts, but just enough to keep it at a temperature where the Bondo is going to dry properly. One advantage of the cold weather, I was able to use most of the mixture of Bondo, whereas in the mid 70s, like I said, by the time I get halfway done with the Bondo, a lot of times it's already starting to harden up and dry. So that's the one slight advantage of the colder weather for using Bondo. Just feeling this, I can feel there's a slight low spot here, even in this. And part of that is the whole thing with the Bondo, and why a number 2, stage 2, seems to make more sense to me than a stage 3. 3 sounds like you're getting close to finishing. This stuff can get air bubbles in it. So you're mixing up a 2-part material into a fairly viscous, fairly thick slurry, so it's really easy to get air bubbles in it. And also when you're putting it on screwdriver or a spreading tool, it's easy to get air in there. And so a lot of times you'll have slight low pockets. So again, that is kind of what this stuff is made for, is those low pockets, filling those without going to the mixing up a new batch of the smelly 2-part stuff to fix a few air bubbles, a slight low spot. You just take the cap off and put this in there, squeegee over the top, trying to get it fairly smooth, and then sand it afterwards. So that's kind of the theory. This should actually, in my opinion, be a 3, and maybe it is now, if they've actually renumbered their products. I would consider this a closer to a final finishing stage than the 2-part stuff. So, but anyway, the main point was to show something I haven't seen a lot of. Maybe most people have their printers calibrated better than me. Maybe they just don't like showing this part, don't think people would be interested in it. But I wanted to show, this is what I started with. I took 100 grit to all of these areas that have the epoxy, the 2-part JB Weld plastic bond epoxy that I use to glue everything together, to get as much of that residue off as possible before applying the Bondo. So I'll be taking that tape off and doing that when I do this one, because it's still got a bunch of epoxy, and I wanted to try and get as much extra epoxy off as I could. I wasn't sure how the Bondo would stick to the epoxy, like in this seam, if it'd be any different than how it sticks to the plastic. Sanding it seems to be fine. You can see it didn't look like it chipped out from these areas where the epoxy is. So that seems to be working okay. I don't know how well the camera's going to show it, but you can kind of see the layer lines from how the printer prints the thin layers, because the Bondo will get in there and fill that just the same as primer would do, or the Bondo glazing putty. So I didn't want to sand this. That's why I didn't sand this down until it's white, is because I don't need to go that far. White is, I don't know if you want to call it virgin plastic, but white, when I start to see white, I know, hey, I'm getting too plastic, so there's no point in grinding this down. When I spray it with filler, this will look a little bit smoother than this, because this has had some primer or some Bondo fill in between the thin layer lines, whereas this hasn't. So that might look a little bit smoother, but after a few coats of primer, you shouldn't notice it. And again, what I did with my body parts is I actually put a thin coat of this over the body parts and ran over it with a scraper to push the glazing putty into those small layer lines. And so I'll probably end up doing that to these legs too before they end up getting painted. So that's why you can see some areas that it's like, well, why didn't I sand that down to pure white? Well, I don't want to take that much off, especially when this is so hard to see. How smooth is this? I mean, I can feel it with my hands. It's kind of smooth. I know here, because it's white, this piece is a little bit higher than this piece, because this piece has some of the Bondo left in it. So it's a little bit like that. But apart from the fact that that's facing inside the droid and hardly anyone's ever going to see it, combined with not, it doesn't feel that bad. It's just one of those things where that's good enough until you get primer on it. Then it's all going to be a gray color, and it'll be easier to see, because the white is actually really hard to see imperfections in the white, because of the nature of how bright and the white material is. It doesn't just show off imperfections all that well. So It's a good thing when you go to finally paint your droid, I guess, because it'll hide some imperfections. But when you're trying to finish it and figure out where you need work, it makes it a little bit tougher. So that's why some of those areas are still a little bit brown, because that's actually fine. And then again here, where I said the corners of my prints seem to lift up for whatever reason. So between the corners of the print lifting up and this side piece being a little bit, looks like it glued like this a little bit, where this end was a bit higher, this end was a bit lower, makes this corner an area that really needed some work to get to level. But running my fingers over it, it feels like it did a pretty good job there. Pretty good job. Especially when that's going to be bolted up to the droid, you're not really going to see much of that anyway. So the front was the main part. So I did the back first just to make sure the Bondo was going to stick well, and that does seem to be sticking just fine. The front and the sides, which this one I think is one of the worst as far as the side pieces. Yeah, I had some under extrusion, or my first layer was too high on this one. So that's glazing putty should fill that, but I'll probably go ahead and use the Bondo since I'll have it out. And I've got these, well, this here for this plate that joins the two parts together. There's got a seam there, so I'll probably just wipe some Bondo down there. And obviously here, where this piece is, and here, because you can see the print lines. Because this piece, the way this piece is printed flat on the bed in the orientation, you see it. It has that stair-stepping effect. So that's all going to be filled in with Bondo, so it's a smooth transition from it to the top. So I had enough Bondo left over after doing the back that I was able to put some on the front here. This is a bit rough. It was just starting to dry as I was putting this on, so this is a little bit rough in this area here. But you can see it's the same type thing where I'm just trying to get where these pieces join together level. And you can see in the seam here between this piece and this piece, it looks like this piece is a little bit higher than this piece when I glued it together. Or rather, this piece is higher and this piece is lower, because this piece is all white, and then this one's got some Bondo on it, so it's a little bit low in that corner. And the same thing here. This piece is a bit high, that piece is a bit low, but it's got a nice transition. The horseshoe fits on top of there, so that's, by the time I do a little bit more finishing there, that'll be okay. And then same thing down here. This one feels pretty level. This one's a little bit low, but it's better than the back side, which again was part of the plan, trying to get the front side of the two to look better if I had a choice of which one was going to look better. So there you have it. Just a little bit about Bondo, showing my slow progress on getting the legs in a state where they'll be ready for primer when the weather turns and I can do it. And also showing something that I haven't seen too much of, as in, hey, this is what my printer came up with, and yeah, I wish it was a better, tighter, more even fit, but this is what I got, and I'm going to make the best of it. And it looks like it's going to turn out pretty darn well, judging by what I've got so far. So hope that helps somebody maybe who's got prints that are a little bit rough. Again, I am not sponsored by Bondo, although that would be nice. So I did learn about this product from the R2D2 forums. I bought 4 tubes of this off Amazon for $20. This is my second tube. The first one I used mostly on my dome. Then the rest of it I used on body panels. And what I've used of this is also on the body panels. And I said a tub of this is like $10. It lasts quite a while, especially if you do, like I said, where you cut your portions and you don't mix up what they say, because a lot of times what they say is more for, working on a car where you've got a large area where you can just quickly, swipe the thing onto the car, as opposed to this where I'm going slow and I'm making sure it's filling and it's level. And then I have to do it up here and then turn it around in here and turn it around in here, and it's a lot slower process when you're doing fine detail work, and so that stuff dries so fast that it can cause a lot of waste if you're making too much at one time. That's about it. And yeah, at first I felt like I didn't get anything done this week, but after I sanded this and saw how it was turning out, I decided, you know what, that's pretty good. And tomorrow I have some stuff to do, but I might be able to at least sand this and get it ready for its first coat. And then at the same time, maybe do the second, because this is the first of the Bondo. Put a little bit, I think I could put a little bit more up there to make that a little bit better. So that needs Bondo. This needs the 2-part Bondo. This I'll probably use the glazing putty. It depends if I'm just decide to just swipe that whole thing with the 2-part. We'll see, maybe I'll do that, but at the very least, this stair stepping here I want to get with the 2-part Bondo and not the glazing putty. And then, like I said, this panel here I think is one of the worst of the side panels, where the first layer isn't all that great. So some more down there. And on the inside, I haven't even looked really. I know I need some right here because this plate is glued onto the leg, so there's a seam there, so that needs some. And I don't think I put a support in here when I printed. Right, I printed it in this orientation. And had a support so it doesn't feel that bad up here. So I'll probably use glazing putty up there to get that a bit smoother. You see there's a little chip right there. Glazing putty is probably fine for that. So anyway, yeah, got a bit of work to do, but liking how it's going so far, other than slow.